If you were alive and mostly sentient during 2012 to 2016, you might have heard of Gravity Falls. It's about Dipper and Mabel, two twins who spent the summer in a cryptid-infested town with their Grunkle Stan, who runs a rundown tourist trap called the Mystery Shack. They also get occasionally antagonized by Dimension Hopping Triangle because Dimension Hopping Triangles tend to be antagonistic. The show was fairly well received, but the reason I'm bringing it up is because it was one of the first notable mainstream usages of ciphers and codes in media. But before we get into what the role of encryption in media is, let's go over what encryption is. The point of encryption is to take a message and make it so that only the intended recipient can understand it. Let's say there's Alice and Bob, and they're in Bob's apartment, and Alice needs to tell Bob her social security number and mother's maiden name. But wait! Bob's next door neighbor, Dave, is watching after installing secret cameras in Bob's apartment a week ago, so everything they say or do in that room is not secure. Now, obviously, Dave is extremely evil and it's clear that he cannot be trusted with this information whatsoever, so what should Alice and Bob do? Simple, they use a code or cipher to make text incomprehensible to anyone besides each other. The original text, which is called plain text, through encryption becomes ciphertext, which is encrypted text. This does come with a drawback though. They have to agree on which method to use ahead of time before exchanging ciphertext in that compromised room, because the entire point is that only the intended recipient can turn it back into plain text. Encryption has been used and is still being used for practical reasons. One very famous example comes in the form of the Enigma machine, which was used by the Germans to encrypt messages during World War II. Unfortunately for them, it wasn't very effective. In modern days, encryption via much more complex methods are used to make sure hackers can't steal important information mid-transit, like banking information. Ciphers like the Caesar cipher or the substitution cipher, where letters have direct corresponding letters, or the Vigenère cipher, where the corresponding letter is dependent on the accompanying key, have known methods to break them, making them insecure by today's standards. Modern methods also address verification issues, as in what happens if someone tries to impersonate Bob. When we look at encryption in media, oftentimes it's either used to reveal information essential to progress, which occurs in engagement-driven media like alternate reality games and video games, or optional information that provides more world building in other types of media that are relatively independent of viewer interaction. Let's analyze these two scenarios using what we know about encryption. Specifically, we'll be asking the questions, why is it encrypted, and who is the intended recipient? In both scenarios, from a meta standpoint, the intended recipient is always the viewer. However, in the first scenario, the encryption serves as a barrier to entry. No matter how good the story is, inevitably there will be people who won't bother with it, because it requires more than them sitting there and consuming media. In the second scenario, the encryption serves as a way to provide more world building. In that sense, the intended recipient is more nuanced. Rather than the general viewer, it's for people who want more information. For the former, accessibility should be taken into more consideration, and for the latter, justification should be taken into more consideration. Obviously, with good enough justification, you can throw hard encryption puzzles at people who enjoy it and have them progress the story despite the difficulty. But if you can't come up with a reason something should be heavily encrypted, don't make it heavily encrypted, and don't expect people to solve it if you do. And no, just because it's cool isn't good enough a reason. We should also acknowledge the fact that people expect a fair reward for their effort. The more effort someone has to put into deciphering it, the more important that information has to be. If someone has to break 5 layers of encryption just to get the transcript of a call between the protagonist and their strange mother, it better not be about how the protagonist lost their socks at the laundromat last Thursday, unless that somehow contributes to the main story, because that level of disappointment will probably break that person. Now, you should keep in mind that most of this only applies to early audience members, because inevitably there'll be secondary content dedicated to explaining and going through the media, thereby lowering the barrier to entry, but there still needs to be someone capable of making sense of it before there can be an explanation of it, hence why this is all still important. So why use ciphers at all if it's not for everyone? Well, when used correctly, ciphers can invite people to engage on a different level with media. In a sense, it gives the audience a chance to solve part of the mystery themselves and makes it more memorable because of that engagement. This type of engagement can also help develop a community dedicated around solving these puzzles, which I'd argue is harder to form without these interactions. However, that can also feed into the sunk cost fallacy. All that time spent solving puzzles will make the audience less likely to quit. While it gives creators more leniency further on in their series, they also shouldn't take advantage of it. As with all things, overuse and misuse can destroy people's perception of something, so use it wisely. With proper usage, new experiences might be created that wouldn't otherwise be possible.